My brother sold our father's car after I maintained it alone for years, so I took legal ownership and left him regretting every lie he told. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I've always been the responsible one in my family, while my younger brother floated through life, charming our parents and dodging responsibilities. I quietly took care of everything no one seemed to notice. After our father passed, he left behind his prized vintage car, a cherry red classic that gleamed like it had frozen time. I remember the first night I cleaned it, the smell of polished leather and engine oil filling the garage, the way the headlights reflected off the garage floor like they were staring right at me, silently judging me for being the only one who cared. Every weekend, every extra shift at work, every dollar I saved went into maintaining it. Oil changes, tire rotations, small repairs I learned from YouTube tutorials. I handled them all. I even restored scratches and replaced worn parts myself, taking pride in every polished curve and tightened bolt. My brother, Mark, on the other hand, never lifted a finger. He'd peek into the garage, grin, and say, "You're obsessed with the car, man. It's just a rusty old thing." His laugh echoed through the house like a reminder that my efforts were invisible, and it hurt more than I expected. I tried to shrug it off, convincing myself it didn't matter that he didn't understand. But every time my parents praised him for being funny or so full of potential, I felt a gnawing frustration I didn't know how to express. My mother once said, "Mark just has a gift for charm. It's his thing," while I silently counted hours spent maintaining the car. Still, I loved the car. It felt like a tether to my father, like carrying a piece of him with me. The smell of leather, the purr of the engine after a fresh tune-up, it grounded me, reminded me that some things in life are worth dedication, even if no one else sees it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this obsession, this responsibility, was slowly becoming my curse, and that one day, it might cost me more than pride. It started with little things. Mark claiming he helped with the car when he didn't, telling our parents he checked the oil or washed it when I knew he hadn't touched it. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe it didn't matter, that my work spoke for itself. But every family dinner, every casual conversation, he found a way to insert himself into the narrative, subtly twisting the story so he looked like the one who cared. I remember one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter, my hands still smelling of engine grease, when he said with that smug grin, "You know, I think Dad would have liked my touch-ups more. You've been too obsessed, man." My parents laughed awkwardly, and my chest tightened. I wanted to shout, to scream that I'd poured years of sweat and money into that car, that it wasn't just a thing to me. It was a piece of our father, and I was keeping it alive. Instead, I forced a tight smile and muttered, "Yeah, sure, Mark." I could feel my jaw clenching so hard it hurt. Afterward, I'd retreat to the garage, run my hands over the polished leather and glossy paint, and feel a fleeting comfort in knowing the truth. Every oil change, every tightened bolt, every hour I spent was proof that I was the one who cared. But seeing Mark take credit in front of my parents, seeing them nod and smile at his words while dismissing mine, burned in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about respect, recognition, and fairness, things my family seemed allergic to giving me. I started keeping detailed records of maintenance, saving receipts, taking photos, even jotting notes on what I did each weekend. It felt obsessive, maybe paranoid, but deep down, I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else to tell the truth. Mark's lies were small now, harmless to him, but I could feel the tension building, like a storm cloud hovering over the garage. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that one day this little war over a car was going to blow up, and I had no idea how messy it would get. The first real betrayal hit like a punch I didn't see coming. One Saturday morning, I went to start the car and noticed the tires were scuffed, the bumper had a fresh dent, and the engine sounded off, like someone had pushed it harder than usual. My stomach sank before I even looked at the garage camera footage. I didn't have to guess. Mark had taken it for one of his joy rides, bragging later about cruising downtown to a couple of friends. I confronted him immediately, my voice tighter than I realized. "Did you take the car without asking?" I demanded, trying to stay calm. Mark shrugged, a lazy smirk on his face. "Yeah, I needed it. Don't worry, I didn't do anything permanent." His casual tone made my blood boil. I could feel my hands trembling, the scent of motor oil and leather overwhelming me as I stared at him. I tried to explain. "This isn't just a car. It's Dad's. It's my work, my effort, everything I put into keeping it perfect." He laughed, that familiar mix of arrogance and amusement, and said, "You take this stuff way too seriously. It's just a car, man. Chill. What hurt more than the dents and scratches was my parents' reaction. My mom said, "It's fine. Accidents happen." While my dad, still mourning in his own quiet way, sighed and shook his head. No one asked about the repairs. No one considered my time or dedication. I could feel my frustration gnawing at me, a slow burn of resentment turning into anger. Every small lie, every moment Mark had claimed credit for my efforts, now seemed like a prelude to this audacity. I spent the rest of the day cleaning and fixing the damage, my hands raw and sore, but my mind racing. This wasn't just about scratches anymore. It was about respect, fairness, and truth, things my family seemed incapable of giving me. And as I wiped down the hood for the third time, I realized something chilling. If I didn't act, this pattern wouldn't stop. It was just beginning. A few weeks after the joyride, I started hearing whispers from neighbors and family friends that made my stomach drop. Apparently, Mark had been telling everyone he had permission to sell the car if he wanted, and that I was just being dramatic. I froze the first time I heard it, sitting on the worn couch in the living room, the smell of my morning coffee forgotten as my mind spun. "He said what?" I asked my mom, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked uneasy, shrugging. "I don't know. He mentioned something, but maybe it was just talk." My heart sank deeper. It wasn't just talk. It was a lie, calculated to paint me as obsessive, unreasonable, and controlling. I confronted Mark in the garage later that evening, the smell of motor oil mixing with tension so thick I could taste it. "You've been telling everyone I'm crazy about the car. That's not true, right?" I asked, trying to measure my words. He laughed, that irritating smirk I hated so much. "Relax, dude. Everyone knows I just look out for it too. You take things way too seriously." But I could see the glimmer of deceit in his eyes, the thrill of having spun a story that made him look like the reasonable one. What made it worse was my parents' reaction. Instead of siding with me, they hesitated, caught between my version and his smooth explanations. I felt invisible, like my years of dedication were erased with a few careless words. I spent that night in the garage, hands on the steering wheel, head resting against the leather, replaying every repair, every hour of my life spent keeping the car pristine, and wondering how someone could manipulate reality so easily. By the time I left the garage, my pride was bruised, but a plan started forming in my mind. If Mark thought he could spin lies without consequences, he was about to find out how wrong he was, and I had no idea yet just how far he was willing to go, or how far I would have to go to stop him. I'll never forget the day I found out. Mark had actually sold the car. I got the call from a family friend who sounded half embarrassed, half amused. "Hey, I think Mark sold the vintage car. Didn't he mention it to you?" My stomach sank, a mix of disbelief and rage twisting in my chest. I walked into the garage, expecting at least the car to be there, some evidence that this was just another one of his lies, and it wasn't. The space was empty, the scent of leather and engine oil lingering like a ghost, mocking me. I confronted him immediately, my voice shaking with anger. "You sold it? Without asking anyone? Without permission?" He leaned against the wall, smirking, like it was some kind of joke. "Relax, man. I figured it was time. Someone else enjoyed it. Dad would have wanted it." I could feel my blood boiling, my hands trembling. "You stole something I worked years to maintain, something you didn't even respect." My parents had started to gather around, confused, hesitant, trying to mediate. The worst part wasn't just the money or the car itself. It was the betrayal. The years I'd spent keeping the car perfect, the pride in maintaining it as a connection to Dad, erased with a single selfish act. My parents hesitated, their eyes flicking between us, and I realized they were letting him twist the story to avoid conflict. The sense of helplessness hit me harder than anything before. I felt small, unseen, powerless. But amid the shock and betrayal, a spark ignited. I wasn't going to let this go. I realized this wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about justice, respect, and making sure he couldn't lie his way out again. As I stared at the empty garage, running my hands over the cold cement where the car once sat, I knew I had to fight back, and I had to do it smart. Something had shifted in me that day, a quiet resolve that Mark had just awakened. That night, I hit rock bottom. I sat in my empty garage, the smell of motor oil still lingering, staring at the cold, bare floor where Dad's car had once sat. My hands shook, not just from anger, but from the crushing realization that no one seemed to see what I'd done, what I'd sacrificed. Friends and distant relatives started taking Mark's side without knowing the truth. His charm always carried farther than my quiet diligence. I felt isolated, like I was shouting in an empty room while everyone else applauded the liar. Every memory of weekends spent polishing, repairing, and fine-tuning the car felt like it had been stolen from me along with the vehicle. I replayed the past years in my mind, the small lies, the mocked efforts, the parents' subtle favoritism, and it all hit me at once. The betrayal wasn't just about a car. It was about trust, family, and the principle that work and loyalty should matter. I remember gripping my notebook, filled with receipts, repair logs, and photos of every dent I'd fixed, thinking, this is my proof. This is how I fight back. The anger was still there, but now it was sharpened into focus. I realized I couldn't rely on anyone else to recognize the truth. I had to take matters into my own hands. I spent hours that night planning, outlining every step, documenting every repair, organizing witnesses, preparing evidence that would be impossible to ignore. The garage, once my sanctuary, now felt like a war room. I could almost hear Dad's voice in my head, calm and steady, reminding me that integrity was worth defending. I wasn't going to cry or beg for fairness anymore. I was going to claim what was rightfully mine, and Mark would finally see that his lies had consequences. By the time I left the garage, exhaustion had set in, but my resolve burned, brighter than ever. I didn't know exactly how I was going to win, but I knew this was the point of no return, and I could feel the first sparks of the battle ahead. The next few weeks became a blur of receipts, photos, and painstaking notes. I dug through every past repair, every part I'd replaced, every oil change, cataloging it like evidence in a court case I hadn't filed yet. I reached out to friends and mechanics who had helped me or witnessed my work, quietly asking if they could confirm my efforts. Every small detail mattered. The exact mileage, the date of each restoration, even the specific products I used on the leather and paint. Meanwhile, Mark strutted around, still bragging to anyone who would listen about how he handled the car. I had to bite my tongue countless times, pretending nothing was happening, while my blood boiled behind a calm facade. Some nights, I'd stand in the garage, running my hands along empty surfaces, imagining the car back in its rightful place, and feeling both grief and determination. The smell of oil and polish haunted me, a bittersweet reminder of what was lost and what I was fighting for. Every day, I reminded myself that patience was key. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about strategy. I started rehearsing conversations, planning how I would confront Mark, and preparing documentation that would leave no room for manipulation. I could feel the tension rising, a storm quietly building before the inevitable confrontation. Even Mark sensed it. He'd give me these sideways glances, a flicker of doubt in his eyes that he tried to hide with smirks and jokes. But I could see through it, and it fueled me further. I wasn't just preparing evidence. I was reclaiming control, reclaiming a piece of my father, and reclaiming my dignity. And deep down, I knew he had no idea how thorough I could be when I decided to fight. The game had changed, and I was ready for the moment when every lie he told would finally come crashing down around him. I finally contacted a lawyer, and that's when things got real. Sitting in the sterile office, the smell of polished wood and leather chairs filling the room, I laid out every receipt, every photo, every meticulous note I'd kept over the years. The lawyer leaned back, eyebrows raised, and said, "You have a solid case. Ownership can absolutely be proven with this kind of evidence." I felt a flicker of hope mixed with adrenaline. I wasn't just angry anymore. I had power on my side. Mark had no idea what was coming. I left the office with a folder heavier than my anxiety, but lighter than the weight of knowing I could finally make him accountable. Back home, I quietly filed for legal ownership of the car. The official notice went straight to him, and I could almost feel his smug confidence shatter before my eyes. He called me later, voice sharp, trying to mask panic. "What's this? You're really doing this?" I said nothing at first, letting the silence hang between us, the tension crackling like static in the air. "I've kept records for years, Mark. It's over," I finally said, calm but deadly serious. My parents were caught in the middle, unsure who to believe. Some of them still hesitated, their eyes flicking nervously between us, but I could see a shift, a subtle recognition of the truth I'd carried silently for years. For the first time, I felt validation, not just for the car, but for every hour, every drop of sweat, every ounce of dedication that Mark had tried to erase. And as I closed the door behind me, the garage empty but filled with memories, I realized this wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my father's legacy, and finally showing that lies have consequences. The day of the court hearing felt unreal. The smell of polished wood and the faint hum of air conditioning made the small courtroom feel suffocating, and my palms were slick with sweat as I clutched my folder of evidence. Mark walked in, trying to look confident, but I could see the slight hesitation in his step. When the judge called us forward, I laid out everything: receipts, logs, repair photos, statements from friends and mechanics who had witnessed my work. I spoke clearly, trying to keep my voice steady, even as adrenaline and years of suppressed frustration coursed through me. "Your Honor," I said, "I've maintained this car alone for years. My brother sold it without permission, and I have the records to prove ownership and investment." Mark sputtered, his usual charm faltering under the weight of irrefutable evidence. He tried to explain, tried to spin the story, but it was like watching a house of cards collapse. I could feel the tension in the room, the subtle shifts as witnesses nodded, evidence displayed, and the truth became undeniable. My parents were forced to confront the reality they'd avoided for years. The son who sacrificed, who labored quietly, had been right all along. I remember the faint click of the judge's pen on paper, the stillness that followed, the quiet shock on Mark's face as he realized charm and lies wouldn't save him this time. Sitting back in the courtroom, I allowed myself a small exhale, the weight of years of anger and helplessness easing slightly. But even as relief washed over me, a small, hard part of me stayed alert. This wasn't over yet. Mark would still have to face the consequences, and the emotional aftermath would linger. I could see him, pale and stiff, realizing the full scope of his deception, and I felt a strange satisfaction. Quiet, controlled, and deeply deserved. As I left the courtroom, the sunlight hitting my face felt almost unreal, like the world had shifted slightly in my favor. But I knew one thing. The battle was won, but the lessons, the scars, and the quiet power of standing up for myself would linger far longer than the sound of the gavel. When the judge ruled in my favor, it was surreal. My folder of receipts, photos, and notes had done what words alone never could. Proved that years of care and dedication mattered. Mark's face fell as the ruling was read aloud. Every lie he'd told exposed in the most public way possible. I could feel a mix of relief and triumph swelling inside me. A strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. My parents, finally seeing the truth with their own eyes, offered quiet apologies, their earlier favoritism now replaced with acknowledgement of my efforts. For the first time, I felt recognized, not just for the car, but for everything I'd silently carried for years. Mark didn't argue, didn't even protest. He simply stood there, humiliated, staring at the floor like a kid caught red-handed, and I felt a calm satisfaction. The car, my father's legacy, and my years of effort would finally be back where they belonged. Walking out of the courtroom, I could almost feel the weight of injustice lift off my shoulders. The smell of polished wood, the quiet hum of the courthouse, even the cool air outside. It all felt symbolic of a new chapter. I knew the battle had been won, but more importantly, I'd reclaimed control over something that defined my commitment, my loyalty, and my integrity. As I drove away later that day, even without the car in my hands yet, I felt the shift. Mark's lies had consequences. My hard work had power. I could hear the faint echo of his smug confidence cracking, the realization slowly sinking in that he had underestimated me. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Justice doesn't always come from confrontation or anger. It comes from preparation, patience, and unwavering persistence. But even with victory in sight, the emotional aftermath lingered, a reminder that rebuilding trust and family dynamics would take longer than any courtroom ruling. I knew one thing as I parked outside my garage that evening. This was only the beginning of showing Mark, and everyone who doubted me, what it really meant to honor Dad's legacy. The weeks after the ruling were strangely quiet, almost surreal. The car was back under my care, gleaming like it had always deserved, every curve and bolt a testament to years of dedication. Mark, meanwhile, moved through the house with an awkwardness I hadn't seen before, a mix of embarrassment, resentment, and disbelief. Our parents were slowly adjusting, their eyes occasionally flicking toward me with something like respect, though awkward and belated. Friends who had doubted me before now quietly offered congratulations, nodding in recognition of what I had accomplished. I could feel a shift in the house's energy, subtle but unmistakable, like the balance had finally begun to tip in my favor. I spent hours in the garage, running my hands over the polished surfaces, taking in the scent of leather and motor oil that felt like victory itself. Every repair, every weekend spent tinkering alone, suddenly seemed worth it, not just for the car, but for the lesson it taught me about patience, strategy, and standing up for myself. Mark tried to make small jokes, to reclaim some semblance of control, but I didn't engage. He had been stripped of his lies, and the quiet humiliation weighed heavier than any shouting match ever could. I realized that the power I had gained wasn't just legal. It was emotional, personal, and profound. At night, I'd sit in the garage with a mug of coffee, the cool metal of the car under my fingers, thinking about everything that had happened. Betrayal, lies, favoritism. It had all led to this moment of validation, a recognition of my work and my character. And though the victory was satisfying, I also knew the journey had changed me. I wasn't the same quiet, overlooked son anymore. I was someone who had learned that boundaries, preparation, and persistence were stronger than charm, manipulation, or favoritism. As I turned off the garage light that evening, I felt a calm settle over me, but a tiny spark of anticipation lingered. Because the story wasn't just about winning the car. It was about showing Mark, and everyone who doubted me, what it truly meant to stand your ground.